All right, you guys, welcome back to another episode of the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast, episode 129, The Power of Language, How Your Words Shape Your Practice. I'm your host, Mark Thackeray, and I'm very excited about this topic just because it's something that I am personally working on, trying to do better with this because I do recognize the power of words and the effect that they have on ourselves, on our team, and ultimately our patients as well. Because the words we use every day are they're doing one of two things. They're really either building our practice the way that we envision it, or it is quietly working against it, because words just work that way. They have an effect on the way we see ourselves, the way we treat ourselves, and the way that we treat others. We don't always recognize that, but they do. And in fact, most people think that they place all the emphasis on systems and marketing and team training and all these things. And those are very important, especially the marketing. But there's something even more fundamental than that. And it's language. It's how we speak to each other as a team. It's how we talk to our patients. And probably most importantly, it's how we talk to ourselves, the language we use with ourselves internally. Words don't just describe reality, they help create it. And that's the truth. You know, when I talk with clients and they are just starting to get into marketing and having more of a marketing mindset, I constantly try and remind them that they will figure this out. And that language is intentional. If you can tell yourself that, you are much more likely to succeed than someone that is constantly criticizing yourself for falling short or for not understanding it or not having the results or success that you're looking for. But if you can remind yourself that you are going to figure this out, it tells you that you are on the path, you are making progress, and you're going to get there. I will definitely figure this out. And I have to remind myself that too. I'm definitely trying to practice what I preach. Not always the best at it, but I've seen a noticeable difference in how I feel and how I act and how I react when I'm using better language with myself. Language is interesting because it has a very big impact on culture, on confidence, on expectations, on decision making. And we can just look around and see that. You know, I have 4 daughters and 3 of them are teenagers right now. And I'm dressed in pink because of that. No, good color. I love it. And my daughters are amazing. I love them. I'm so thankful for them. One of the things that's interesting is watching them learn how to use language and use it properly. They're still struggling with it in a lot of ways. And I did too when I was that age. You'd say things just flippantly or sarcastically without realizing the impact that it has on you and other people. And we see that as a society, you know, those people, and you can think about those people that you've come across in your experience, those that have a really good command of language are perceived as successful. They are perceived as experts and someone who understands what's going on and how to make things happen, how to solve problems. Those that don't, you wonder, you question. People that can't string together a sentence, you tend to judge that person. Is that right? Is that wrong? That's not what I'm debating right now, but we have that tendency to inside, we typically say, oh, person's just not as bright. You know, their perception decreases essentially. And I love this quote by Henry Ford, who said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's the key to this whole episode, this whole approach with language and why it's so important. Because it truly does manifest itself down the road. All the great people, all the huge influences in my life. I think back to Jim Rohn, who I've mentioned several times on the podcast, inspiration, motivational speaker, Tony Robbins, a lot of spiritual leaders. The language they use determines what they become. Again, whether you think you can, whether you think you can't, you're right. If that's the case, if that truly is correct, why not change your language? Why not decide that you are going to succeed and succeed massively? That things will be incredible, that you will realize your dreams. Why not do that? Why not strategically, or maybe I should say, why not be more intentional about the language and the words that we use, especially to ourselves? So how does this look inside of a practice? Okay, so let's talk about scheduling, for example. That's a great example. Sometimes you might hear something like from a team member, or maybe you've said these words yourself, we have a scheduling problem. Now compare that with these words. We have an opportunity to improve scheduling. What's the difference? Same situation, two completely different meanings. One has a negative mindset, negative perspective on it. We've got a problem. Man, it's just problems. It's all we're dealing with. Not even inclined to think of a solution. It's just a problem. It's just there. It's a wall. Versus, hey, we have a chance to improve our scheduling. See this as an opportunity. This is a chance to grow, to improve, to get better, to make our practice so much more effective for our patients. You look at it, you're appreciative. you appreciate that opportunity to change and to improve. Totally different mindset, totally different outcome. There's a great book on mindset from Carol Dweck, if I'm pronouncing that right, but she talks about having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset is, this is who I am. I'm not going to change. This is just the person I was born as, and nothing's going to affect that. Whereas a growth mindset is, oh, I can figure that out. I can do that. You see these as opportunities. You see these as things that you can ultimately understand and be able to do, right? Very different mindset with very different results. So it's a great chance to look at yourself, look at your team. What kind of mindset do we have as a practice? Are we a fixed mindset? Do we look at problems and think, man, these are just problems. We just deal with these. They're just problems. What can we do about these problems? We can't do anything. Versus a growth mindset where someone says, you know what? I've done it this way for so long, but that's okay. I can change. I can get better. I can do that. Yes, I'm not typically this type of person, or I haven't been in the past, but that doesn't mean I can't change. Sometimes you get those team members. Sometimes we're that person who thinks that's just not me, period. And because we say that, it lets us off the hook. We think, not my problem. That's just not me. You can go find someone else. And I think there's some situations where that's okay. When you're determining responsibility, long-term responsibilities, possibly, you do want to try and find alignment with someone who naturally is maybe more that way. So there is some nuance to this. But ultimately, we're looking for people that have that growth mindset, that are open to change and improvement because they see it as an opportunity. So a few things I wanted to touch on real quick. Language with yourself. This is really where it starts. And I mentioned some of the examples before. I'm terrible at marketing, or this is a big one. Patients in my area don't value dentistry. Right? Heard that before. Or we just can't find good team members. The problem with those statements is that after you say them, after you utter those words, your brain, what does it do? It starts to look for evidence that those statements are true. It's trying to corroborate that phrase that you just mentioned, that statement, and look for examples. It's a great quote. I'm trying to remember her name. Jen something. She wrote a couple of books, but she said, that which we focus on, we create more of. And in this instance, if we're focused on the fact that we can't find any good team members, we're going to see ample evidence that that is true, that it is hard to find good team members. We're going to see all the bad team members that are showing up for interviews. However, if we're able to adjust our focus and look for, say, I know there are good team members out there and I'm going to find them, then you will start to see signs that there are truly good people out there ready to be hired. I do this all the time with my kids, and I'm trying to get better at it. Sometimes we get on this, we get fixated with certain things that we don't like about ourselves, about other people. You know, I'll give an example of one of my kids, and they just aren't great about doing this. For example, about communicating when they're leaving the house, or responding to questions about, are you going to finish this or do that around the house, these tasks, these chores, these things, responsibilities. And if I become too fixated on that, that's all I think about. And I completely undermine and avoid really the amazing things that she does. The incredible person that she is, her talents are exceptional. And the way that she can relate to other people and all these things, I miss on. I just totally forget. I fail to recognize those because I'm too focused on the negative. And that is terrible. That makes me feel so bad when I realize what I'm doing to me, to her. And that's the power of this, right? We start looking for those statements, for truth behind those statements, and that's all we see. We become blinded by those words. So instead of saying something like, we're not getting enough referrals, or we're not getting enough new patients, just add one word to the end of that statement. And that word is yet. We're not getting enough referrals yet. We're not getting enough new patients yet. The simple addition of that word creates possibility. And it helps us become more growth-minded. I think the other part of this is that language creates essentially stories. They're stories that we tell ourselves, and that's essentially who we're going to become. And that's really another way to look at all this is just, what's the story that I'm living? Like what is the story that I'm living right now, or I'm creating for myself or for my team or my practice? And that leads us into the next section, which is the language inside your team. And every practice tends to develop a vocabulary. And I want to ask you, think about that for a second and think about specific examples of phrases you hear a lot inside your practice. Phrases that occur with patients, phrases that may crop up during team meetings, behind the scenes when patients aren't in the chair. How does that language look and feel? Is it helping? Is it hurting? Do you see signs of negative language, like patients never listen, or insurance never covers this, nobody wants treatment, it's just how things are right now, okay? It's just the economy that we're in right now. Said too much, those phrases become beliefs. And beliefs eventually become behaviors. You see that self-fulfillment that we talked about earlier, where the more you say something, the more you believe it's true, the more you act on that. Those beliefs turn into behaviors and actions. And that's what gets you where you're at. That's what takes you to where you currently are. So evaluate what's going on in your practice in terms of those phrases, the language that's being used. Determine if that is helpful or if it's harmful. And how do you improve on that? So again, instead of saying something like nobody wants treatment, ask yourself, how can we help new patients better understand the value of coming to our office, of coming in for a cleaning, of coming in for a checkup? What can we do to make it so painfully obvious that this is a tremendous thing for them? Same thing with, you could look at your patients. It could be say it's a retention problem. We have a retention problem. That statement could easily become what type of experience would get patients excited to come back to our practice? How can we create that? There's a great sports example from head coach, Nick Saban, famous Alabama football coach. And he was known for the process, quote unquote, the process. Trust the process. It wasn't about the championships. It wasn't about the wins, the outcomes, things like that. But it was focused exclusively, pretty much, on daily behaviors, on controllable actions, and the language that they used to shape that culture. Because he believed culture shaped results. If you can build that culture within a team, you're going to find the results. You're going to see the results that you're hoping for. In his case, championship after championship after championship. He was a beast. They were always so hard to beat. You could never count Alabama out. And that's because he focused on those things that they could control. And he built a culture around that with that growth mindset, using language that's geared towards that, geared towards, I can do this, I can change this, I'm flexible, all those things. And then the last thing to consider, so we've talked about language that you use with yourself, language you use with your team. Now let's talk about language with patients. This is where our words have a direct effect on case acceptance. So something like, you need a crown. You could say, I'm concerned that this tooth may crack if we don't do anything to protect it. See that difference? You need a crown versus I am worried that this tooth is going to get worse, that it's going to crack. We're going to have more issues. It's just going to be even more a nasty case if we don't do anything to protect it. That's a very big difference, right? One's very direct and it removes it removes you as an advocate for the patient. It's not demonstrating your concern for their outcome, for their tooth, their health. You're not looking out for their best interest because, you're not explaining that this could become much worse. You're not empowering them to make a better decision, right? Another example could be this procedure costs $4,000. Instead, you could say something along the lines of, this treatment allows us to save the tooth and to avoid much more difficult, painful, complex process down the road. We want to avoid that treatment down the road. That's why I recommend going forward with this treatment today. If you were my mom, I would absolutely not want you to put this off just because I'm worried of what it could become. I've seen what it can become. It's terrible. It's nasty. It's expensive. I don't want that for you. Very different approach, right? Last example, instead of asking any questions, very common thing that we hear all the time, you can say something like, what questions can I answer for you? Because the first one assumes confusion is unlikely. Like, any questions? And most people automatically say no, because we're trained to do that. We partially don't want to look dumb if we do have a question. And the other one actually invites conversation. It's encouraging people to share, to speak up, to open up and be candid about how they're feeling. Last couple of things, and then we'll wrap this up. Patients don't make decisions based solely on information. They make decisions based on understanding. They make decisions based on confidence, on emotion, on trust. And that's where language really comes in. It helps create all of those things: understanding, confidence, emotion, and trust. The words you use help build that as you're speaking with patients. So replace those words that you find hear a lot in your practice. Words like problem, failure, cost, complaint, things like that. Replace problem with, what could you replace it? You could replace it with challenge. With failure, you could replace with feedback. It's a great way to look at it. It's just feedback. Like you're in a laboratory. You're just trying to get to an end result, and it's not a you failed, you succeeded. It's just feedback that's getting you farther along the path. Cost you could place with investment, right? Very big difference. Very big difference. You see that with a lot of companies, a lot of transactions. You invest in something that you appreciate, right? That you're investing in yourself, you're investing in your health, you're investing in your family, you're investing in your future. Whereas this, you don't look at it as like, this is a cost for my future. I'm spending money for my future. No, I'm investing. It implies that you are being strategic about it. You are doing something now with a bigger return later, right? So look at it that way. Complaint, you could change to opportunity. There's just so many ways, subtle shifts, but you have to look at it and you have to be diligent in replacing those, talking to your team about it, making sure you're all on the same page to help catch each other and change your culture. So look for those recurring phrases that you're hearing, the patient phrases you're hearing as well. It's great to get your team involved on this. Let's write them on the board so we can all see them. And then draw a little arrow and ask, how can we improve this language? How can we help our practice become that much better by being specific about the words that we use? The patient phrases, use that as feedback. We can't really adjust what they say, but we can control our actions around those, patient experiences. If they're telling us one thing, we can say, okay, that's good to know. Perhaps we can adjust this part of our process to help reduce the amount of things that people are saying, negative things that we're hearing, or the feedback that we're getting. See, I just did it right there. The feedback that we're getting from patients. Okay. Ask your team and look at yourself too, and be very candid. What kind of language am I using with myself? How can I improve that? Okay. Is that moving our practice forward, or is it keeping us from progressing? Final thought would be your practice. I like this quote. Your practice is largely a reflection of the conversations happening inside it. So the conversations with patients, conversations with your team, the conversation that's going on right now inside your head. It's those conversations that make up the practice. Different way to look at it, right? What are people saying about you? What is your team saying about you and your practice? And what are your patients saying about you and your practice? So we'll end with this quote attributed to Lao Tzu. Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. And please do this. This will help not just your practice, not just your patients, but your life. And that's going to directly affect your family and so many others. We can change the world. It's a very ambitious statement, but it really is true. It's cool to see the power of words in your life. When you start getting turned on by that, you will that's why you read good books. That's why you listen to these speakers that are so magnetic and charismatic and inspirational because they have the ability to connect with you via their words. And you can tell that a lot of them have spent so much time on this because there's confidence behind those words. There's power. You can feel that. You can feel that it's true for them. So I invite you to do that as I'm trying to do. We'll do this together. I'd love to get your feedback on that too, if you have any questions or see how it's going. It's always a huge benefit is when I hear back from listeners. So feel free to shoot me an email. That's mark@markthackeray.com. Love to hear your thoughts. But until then, you guys, have a good week. Make it a good week. And we'll talk to you next time.